All right, welcome to Note 7.1, Day 2. We're going to talk here about Germany through the years of the Weimar Republic until Hitler's rise to power. We'll talk about all the anti-Semitism and the start of the war and all the rest of that tomorrow, but this is going to be what we're going to hit today. So this is an artist's rendition of the pain and suffering of the German people. And in 1933, much like most of the rest of the world, they were in part of the Great Depression and there weren't enough jobs, enough money, enough food for people. And at the end of World War I, Germany signs the Treaty of Versailles, puts all the guilt of World War I onto Germany, and gives Germany a $32 billion bill to pay back to England and France because of their, it was their fault during the war. And this might cause a bit of an economic crisis on top of the Great Depression, right? So they don't have a lot of money in the first place, and they got to pay back a lot of it to England and France. And there's a bit of hyperinflation where basically 1 billion marks was $1. So you needed 1 billion German dollars to equal like what we think of as $1 today. If you were lucky enough to have a job at a factory, they you would work your morning shift and they would pay you during your lunch break, and you would take that wheelbarrow of money home to just stacks and stacks of bills, take that home to your wife, and they would run out as fast as they could to the store and buy anything they could, any kind of food, any bread, any meat that might be there, not a whole lot of meat, any vegetables, anything, that they can get. And then you'd go back to work and you'd work the last half of your shift and they'd pay you again, because in between your morning shift and your evening shift, the prices of things would keep going up. Inflation would keep going nuts. So the money you were making got worth less and less and less as we went throughout the day. And those were the people that were lucky enough to have jobs. A lot of people didn't. And here you can see the picture, like it says, a German housewife burned mark notes. That was, it was German mark. It was like $1. Because it was cheaper to burn these paper marks than it was to buy firewood. That's a pretty rough situation. So who do the German people blame? Well, they blame a lot of people. But the number one people they blame is the Weimar government. And the Weimar government is the official name of the German government during this interwar period after World War I into World War II. And they were blamed for selling out Germany by signing the treaty. They were blamed, the phrase was, the Weimar government stabbed Germany in the back. And the thing is, the people spreading those rumors were the ones in charge of the military, and they knew that was false. They knew the war was over, but to the German people, it looked like the civilian government surrendered too early. And so they blamed the Weimar government. And as part of the Weimar government, now the Weimar government wasn't made up of a bunch of Jewish people, but they were honestly pretty friendly to Jewish people. They weren't communists. It was not a communist government, but they didn't murder the communists in the country, so they were kind of friendly to the communists. And these, sort of democratic liberals, liberal Democrats, sorry, is the right way to phrase that. And so the question here we'll do on Pear Deck during class is who was blamed for their problems. Not who was actually at fault, but who got blamed. Well, as you saw, the Weimar government and other groups in Germany, the Jewish people, the communists, and the liberals get the blame. Now, whose fault was it actually? A whole lot of people, a lot of different people. I mean, the military didn't do a great job. The leadership during World War I, letting it get as bad as it did. So what does the U.S. think? What do we do? We go back to that isolationism we talked about yesterday. We're out. Now, we do insist that England and France, who borrowed so much money from us, especially at the start of the war when we were neutral, we need to get that money back. And England and France are like, well, we don't have the money. What are you talking about? If Germany pays us back, maybe we'll have the money. And Germany's like, we don't have any money. It's a Great Depression. Nobody has any money. And so a member of the cabinet, I forget his name. Dawes is the last name. I forget his first name. He comes up with a plan where the U.S. will loan Germany some money. Germany pays that back to England and France, and then England and France pay us back for their thing. And you might think, well, that seems silly. But in class, we'll do this as a pear deck. Drag your little dollar sign over who you think wins this one. But just follow the arrows, right? The U.S. is going to give about $2.5 billion in loans to Germany. And then Germany's going to pay back about $2 billion to England and France. And England and France are going to hook us up with that money in return. So who do you think wins in this deal? Is it Germany because they got more money than they started with? Is it the U.S. because they got their, money paid back? It's not England and France. You can make an argument for Germany or for the U.S., but England and France don't really win out in this deal. Now, there were a lot of protests and speeches and all kinds of stuff in Vienna, and here we have a picture of a relatively young Adolf Hitler in Vienna at these crowds. And Hitler was a soldier in World War I. He was badly wounded in a chemical attack, but he survived World War I and comes out of that. So let's talk about Hitler. He was born April the 20th, 1889. Yes, I know, 420. That's why it's a thing. And he was born in Austria, not in Germany. He was an Austrian, not a German. And he was like a C student who wanted to become an artist in Vienna, but because he's not a very good student or a very good artist, he does not get accepted into that art school. You can go look up his paintings if you'd like. They're they're not bad, better than what I can do, but they're not going to one of the most prestigious art academies in the world good. And he believes, at least later on in his life, he claims this, he believes that it was the Jewish people on the board of the Viennese art school that kept him out of it, and therefore the Jewish people are bad. And he had a lot of other reasons for that, mostly stereotypes and lies and things that he didn't really care about but wanted to use as an excuse to get power. We'll get to that. So he ends up going into Germany, into the German army during World War I, ends up in a gas attack which puts him off of chemical weapons for the most part, except for the gas chambers in the Holocaust. But as far as military goes, he's not a big fan of chemical weapons because of his experience as a soldier on the battlefield getting hit with poison gas. So after the war's over and he's in the hospital because of that poison gas attack, while he's in the hospital, the war is over. Germany signs the Treaty of Versailles, and he is one of those Germans, well, Austrians, but one of those members of the German army that feels like he was sold out by the civilian leaders of the Weimar Republic, who he thought of as Jewish and communist, but there weren't a ton of Jewish or communist people in the government. And so now, he never really liked communists, he never really liked Jewish people, so this only makes it worse. Moves to Munich, a big city in Germany, and joins up with a group calling themselves the Nazis, the National Socialists. And you might be like, well, hold on, socialism? Nazis are socialists? No. Socialism was pretty popular in Germany at the time, so they just sort of threw that in their name to kind of get popularity from having that in their name. They were fascists. That's what the nationalist part is. So if anyone's like, actually, the Nazis were socialists and liberals. No. No. If you want to send me an email, but if you find someone and you're like, well, actually, they have a lot of points to it, send me an email. We'll talk about it. You don't have to like socialism. You don't have to like liberals. That's fine. I'm not your political advisor. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to tell you that's not true. So, Yeah, he's pissed, and he joins up with a bunch of other young people who are also incredibly mad at the Weimar Republic, and he gets in with the group. He's an incredible speaker, an incredible public speaker. I'm not a fan of Hitler, obviously. If you've been in my class any length of time, you've probably heard me. The whole thing of like, I'm not your political advisor. I'm not here to tell you what to believe politically. I'm here to tell you don't be a Nazi. I'm here to tell you they are terrible. Their political philosophy is nothing but violence. And yeah. But you do have to recognize, even when one of your enemies is good at something, because how else are you going to fight against it? So he was an amazing public speaker, drew crowds and crowds and crowds, could get people whipped up and amped up and ready to go. And so they put together a plan to bring down the Weimar Republic. And one of the wild things that you learn if you study the Weimar Republic is, there were accusations that Jewish people and communists were running the government, and they really weren't. But Jewish people were allowed into society, which in Europe was pretty unheard of. Anti-Semitism was a huge thing all throughout Europe and America. And one of the safest places to be Jewish in Europe during the Weimar Republic was Berlin. One of the safest places to, be a more liberal political thing, or even a straight-up communist, was Germany, because they weren't just going to straight-up murder you for being, of that political alignment. And not that they were run by communists and Jews, but because they weren't just going to outright murder them or pass laws against them or whatever. And I mean, honestly, even to take something sort of a modern, what's often thought of as a more modern issue, one of the safest places to be transgender on Earth in the early 1930s was the city of Berlin. There were doctors there doing just incredibly advanced work on, sort of the idea of gender and, biological sex and all the rest of that stuff. And those are a lot of the books that were burned when the Nazis took power and burned a lot of books, were those research and that data. And, that science, thankfully we've recovered, some of that knowledge over the years. But a lot of that science was destroyed and pushed back decades and decades and decades because of the Nazis. So that comes soon. But for now, the Weimar Republic is still around. It's still a pretty, honestly, chill place to be. At least in the cities, if you have a job and have any kind of money, which is not a lot of people. And so there is what's called the beer hall putsch. There's a big beer hall. There's a lot of beer halls in Munich, but there's the sort of the beer hall that the Nazis met at. And they're going to hey, we're going to overthrow the government. And unfortunately for Hitler, but fortunately for the world, some people turn him in. And they're hey, this dude's going to try and overthrow your government. And he gets arrested. He gets thrown in jail for a while. An image of Hitler and his Nazis in Munich. Nice car. Not going to get into which car companies were happy to build cars for the Nazis. You can look that up yourself. So after he goes to prison, or while he's in prison, sorry. So he goes to prison, he's in prison, and he writes his most famous book, Mein Kampf, which translates roughly into English as My Struggle, the struggle I've had in my life. And it's basically an instruction manual on how to, bring the German Aryan people back to power. And he basically says, my future Germany, there's no Jewish people. It's led by this master race of German Aryans. And the German people will be at the top of the food chain. And we will rule things, and other people will serve us, and we will have a great economy. And a lot of people in Germany, no jobs, no money, no food, no hope. That sounds good to them. And they're willing to put up with the stuff they don't really care about. Because there are a lot of newspapers. You go back and look at newspapers, and they'll say, well, if Hitler gets elected, yeah, he'll do the popular things like the economic stuff, but all that anti-Jewish stuff, anti-communist stuff, that's just talk, and the rest of the government won't let him do that anyway, so we don't have to worry about it. And that sounds similar to what happened with Mussolini in power. Yeah, Hitler is following this playbook. And Hitler becomes chancellor mostly peacefully. Now, there is violence in the streets. There are German street gangs fighting against each other. The fascist street gangs, Hitler's brown shirts, versus sort of these anti-fascist people who, they were different members of different groups, but they were all sort of united in the fact that they didn't want Hitler or the fascists in power. And so there was violence in the streets, but there wasn't like a military takeover. So Paul von Hindenburg is an incredibly popular military guy in Germany at the time. He was the one who said who said that Germany needed to throw in the towel, surrender. And then he was the one that went and told the German people it was the civilian leadership of the Weimar Republic that stabbed them in the back, because he figured he could take power. Anyway, he basically says, hey, let's put Hitler as the chancellor. I'm the president. I have the real power. Hitler will be my co-pilot. And Hitler basically turns that into immediately grabbing all the rest of the power that he could, immediately suspends the basic constitutional rights of any non-German citizen and any non-Aryans. What he meant by that was anybody who wasn't German, was Jewish, or wasn't white. They all of a sudden don't have rights anymore. They don't have the right to property. You can steal their stuff. They don't have any kind of right to a fair trial. The police can just throw them in jail. And just takes over the government, forces people to take loyalty oaths to him and to the Third Reich, Reich being like kingdom. The Holy Roman Empire, there was the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and now there's going to be the German Empire. Third. So we're going to end today's discussion in class with a rating. What do you think? Could this happen here? Do you think that a dictator could come to power in America like Mussolini did in Italy, like Hitler did in Germany, like Stalin did in Russia? Do you think they could sort of take advantage of our democratic process, get themselves into power, and then become a dictator? So 1 is never, literally impossible given our system, all the way up to 10, it already has. And that could be a historical, it already has. If there's a previous leader of this country where you're like, that guy was a dictator, then you pick a 10. But you have any number in between there too. So give it your best shot, think about it, and we'll see you tomorrow. Stop recording.